The autumn of 1882 brought an unusual chill to Dry Creek, Texas, but nothing could match the ice-cold fear that had settled in Sheriff William "Bill" Garrett's chest. For 3 weeks, his 8-year-old son, Tommy, had been wasting away in the upstairs bedroom of their modest frame house, burning with fever that no amount of cold compresses could break. The boy's once bright eyes had dulled to empty stares, and his small body had grown so thin that his ribs showed through his nightshirt like fence posts. "Sheriff Garrett," Dr. Samuel Henley said quietly, closing his medical bag with the finality of defeat. "I've done everything I know how to do. The fever should have broken by now, but—" He shook his graying head, unable to meet Bill's desperate gaze. "Perhaps it's time to call for Reverend Mitchell." Bill's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Dr. Henley was the 4th physician to examine Tommy, each one more experienced and expensive than the last. The first had been old Doc Peterson from town, who'd prescribed laudanum and rest. When Tommy grew worse, Bill had sent for Dr. Crawford from Austin, a man with a fine reputation and certificates from Eastern medical schools. Crawford had tried bloodletting and mercury treatments, leaving Tommy weaker than before. In desperation, Bill had telegraphed Dallas for Dr. Marcus Webb, a specialist in childhood diseases, who charged $50 just to make the journey. Webb had administered new treatments with strange-sounding names, speaking confidently of miasmic disorders and nervous exhaustion. But Tommy had only grown worse under his care. Now Dr. Henley, supposedly the finest physician in 3 counties, stood in Bill's parlor with the same defeated expression as all the others. "There has to be something else," Bill said, his voice rough with exhaustion and grief. He hadn't slept more than an hour at a time since Tommy fell ill, and his usually neat appearance had deteriorated into wrinkled clothes and several days' worth of stubble. "Some treatment you haven't tried, some medicine from back east." "Bill," interrupted his wife Sarah, descending the stairs with tears streaming down her face, "he's calling for you. I don't think—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear enough. The sheriff climbed the narrow stairs with heavy steps, each board creaking under his weight like a funeral dirge. Tommy's room smelled of sickness and the various tonics that had failed to help him. The boy lay motionless in his small bed, his breathing shallow and labored, his skin pale as winter frost. "Papa?" Tommy's voice was barely a whisper, his eyes struggling to focus on his father's face. "I'm here, son." Bill knelt beside the bed, taking his boy's burning hand in both of his own. "You just rest now, everything's going to be fine." But even as he spoke the words, Bill knew they were lies. Tommy was dying, and all the medical expertise money could buy had proven useless against whatever mysterious ailment had taken hold of his son. The sheriff had faced down armed outlaws, survived the war between the states, and maintained order in a lawless frontier town, but he was powerless to save his own child. As word of Tommy's condition spread through Dry Creek, the community rallied around their sheriff with the fierce loyalty common to small frontier towns. Neighbor women brought meals that went uneaten, while the men offered to take over Bill's duties so he could stay with his son. The local preacher held prayer vigils, and even the saloon girls contributed money for additional medical consultations. "Sheriff," called out Jonas Mackenzie, the town's blacksmith, from the front porch, "my missus heard tell of a doctor in San Antonio who specializes in fever cases. I could ride down there, bring him back if you want." Bill emerged from the house, grateful for the cool evening air after the stifling sick room. "I appreciate the offer, Jonas, but we've already tried 4 doctors. I'm starting to think—" He couldn't finish the thought, couldn't voice the possibility that his son might be beyond medical help. "Don't you give up now, Bill Garrett," said Martha Collins, the banker's wife, who'd been coordinating the women's efforts to help the family. "That boy's got fight in him just like his father. Sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places." But as Bill looked up at Tommy's darkened window, he wondered if he was about to learn that some battles simply couldn't be won. Chapter 2. The Girl from Willow Creek. Rose McKinley had never set foot in the town of Dry Creek before the morning she arrived with her father's weekly delivery of vegetables and fresh milk. At 17, she was what folks kindly called plain. Brown hair that refused to hold a curl, a face more notable for its honest expression than its beauty, and hands permanently stained from working with medicinal herbs and garden soil. Her simple calico dress, mended in several places, marked her clearly as one of the struggling farm families that scratched out a living in the creek bottoms west of town. "Rose, you mind the wagon while I settle accounts with Henderson," her father instructed, unhitching their tired mule in front of Henderson's general store. Samuel McKinley was a weathered man, worn thin by too many failed crops and the constant struggle to feed his family of 7 children. "And don't go wandering off like you did in Cedar Springs." "Yes, Papa," Rose replied automatically, though her attention had already been captured by the unusual quiet that seemed to hang over the normally bustling town. Even at mid-morning, the streets held an atmosphere of hushed solemnity that reminded her of the days following her mother's death 3 years earlier. "Terrible sad thing about the sheriff's boy," commented Mrs. Henderson when Rose entered the store to purchase thread for her younger sister's torn dress. 4 doctors now and none of them able to help. Poor child's been lingering at death's door for near a month." Rose's head snapped up with interest. "What's wrong with him, Ma'am?" "Nobody rightly knows. High fever that won't break, can't keep food down, getting weaker by the day. Last doctor said there wasn't nothing more to be done." Mrs. Henderson shook her head sadly. Sheriff Garrett's about beside himself with grief. An odd sensation stirred in Rose's chest, part sympathy, part something else she couldn't quite identify. Since childhood, she'd possessed an unusual sensitivity to others' suffering, often knowing instinctively what plants or treatments might help with various ailments. Her grandmother had called it the gift, though her practical father dismissed such notions as superstitious nonsense. "Where do they live?" Rose asked, trying to sound merely curious. "Big white house on Elm Street, the one with the green shutters. But child, you don't want to go bothering the sheriff at a time like this. Family needs their privacy for grieving." But Rose was already forming a plan that she knew her father would never approve of. As Mrs. Henderson wrapped her purchase, Rose's mind raced through the medicinal plants she'd observed growing wild along Willow Creek. Willow bark for fever, elderberry for strengthening the constitution, and most importantly, the rare red-rooted sage her grandmother had taught her to recognize and harvest. When her father emerged from his business negotiations, Rose was waiting by the wagon with unusual patience. "Papa, I need to visit someone in town before we head home." "We ain't got time for socializing, Rose. Your ma needs help with the canning and young Thomas has been fighting that cough again." "It's not socializing, Papa, it's—" Rose struggled to find words that wouldn't sound foolish. "There's a sick child here. I think I might be able to help." Samuel McKinley's face hardened with the familiar expression he wore whenever Rose's peculiar notions surfaced. "Rose Elizabeth McKinley, you are not going to embarrass this family by pretending to be some kind of medicine woman. That sheriff's got real doctors tending his boy. The doctors aren't helping, Papa. Maybe nothing. You load that wagon with what we couldn't sell, and we're heading home. I won't have my daughter making a fool of herself in front of respectable folks." But as they prepared to leave town, Rose caught sight of a man standing on the porch of the White House with green shutters. Even from a distance, she could see the defeat in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged under a burden too heavy to bear. Sheriff William Garrett looked like a man watching his world crumble, and something deep in Rose's spirit responded to his desperation. "Papa," she said quietly, "what if it was Thomas lying up there dying? What if there was someone who might help, but they drove away without trying because it wasn't proper?" Samuel's hands tightened on the reins, but he didn't immediately order the mule forward. Rose pressed her advantage, speaking with unusual intensity. "Grandmama always said the gift comes with responsibility, that if I could help and chose not to, the suffering would be on my conscience forever." For a long moment, father and daughter sat in silence while the mule stamped impatiently. Finally, Samuel released a long breath. 10 minutes, Rose. You can speak your piece, but when that sheriff tells you to go on home, you come straight back to this wagon. And if this brings shame on our family—" "It won't, Papa, I promise." Rose climbed down from the wagon with her heart hammering against her ribs, knowing she was about to change the course of several lives, including her own. Chapter 3. The Healing Touch. Sheriff Bill Garrett looked up from his porch with hollow eyes as the young woman approached his gate. She moved with quiet determination, her simple farm dress and worn boots marking her as one of the creek-bottom families who scraped by on subsistence farming. He'd seen enough desperate people in his years as a lawman to recognize someone carrying a heavy burden, though he couldn't imagine what business this girl might have with him. "Sheriff Garrett?" Rose's voice was steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "My name is Rose McKinley. I heard about your son." Bill's face immediately hardened into the protective mask he'd worn for weeks, shielding himself against the well-meaning platitudes and useless advice that neighbors kept offering. "Miss, I appreciate your concern, but unless you're a doctor, "There's nothing. I'm not a doctor," Rose interrupted gently, "but I might be able to help Tommy. I know about healing plants, remedies that sometimes work when regular medicine doesn't." The sheriff's laugh held no humor, only bitter exhaustion. "Young lady, I've had 4 of the finest physicians in Texas examine my boy. They've tried everything from laudanum to mercury treatments. What makes you think some folk remedies could accomplish what trained doctors couldn't?" Rose met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from a conviction she couldn't fully explain. "Because sometimes the old ways know things the new ways have forgotten. My grandmother taught me to read the signs, to understand what the body truly needs. Please, Sheriff, just let me look at him. If I can't help, you've lost nothing but a few minutes." Something in her quiet certainty gave Bill pause. Perhaps it was desperation, or maybe the memory of his own grandmother's herbal treatments from his childhood, but he found himself stepping aside to let her pass. 10 minutes, he said gruffly. "Then you go on home and let my family grieve in peace." Sarah Garrett looked up with surprise as her husband entered Tommy's room with a strange young woman in tow. "Bill, what—" "This is Miss McKinley," Bill explained awkwardly. "She thinks she might be able to help Tommy with plant medicine." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "How dare you bring some ignorant farm girl up here to gawk at my dying child? Haven't we suffered enough humiliation?" "Mrs. Garrett," Rose said softly, approaching the bed where Tommy lay motionless. "I know how this must seem, but I've been working with healing plants since I was old enough to walk. Sometimes simple remedies can reach places that complicated medicines can't touch." She knelt beside the small bed, studying Tommy's flushed face and labored breathing with the intense focus her grandmother had taught her. The boy's fever burned like a forge, but there was something else, a deep exhaustion that seemed to go beyond physical illness, as if his spirit was slowly disconnecting from his failing body. "When did he last take in water?" Rose asked, gently touching Tommy's forehead. "The doctors said liquids weren't important when he couldn't keep them down," Sarah replied defensively. Rose's heart sank. "He's dying of thirst as much as fever. His body's forgotten how to fight because it doesn't have the strength." She turned to face both parents with urgent conviction. "I need willow bark, elderberries, and red-rooted sage. There's a creek about 2 miles west of town where they should grow together." "Miss McKinley," Bill began, but Rose cut him off. "Sheriff, your son has maybe 12 hours left. The doctors have given up because they don't understand that sometimes healing isn't about fighting the sickness. It's about reminding the body how to heal itself." She stood, her plain face transformed by passionate certainty. "Give me those herbs and one chance, and I'll bring your boy back to you." Bill stared at this peculiar young woman who spoke with such conviction about his dying son. Every instinct told him to send her away, to trust in medical science rather than folk superstition. But Tommy's breathing was growing shallower by the hour, and the doctors had already admitted defeat. "Sarah," he said quietly, "what do we have to lose?" His wife's composure finally cracked. "We could lose our son while chasing after fairy tales. What if she makes him worse?" "He's already dying," Bill replied with brutal honesty. "At least this way, we'll know we tried everything." Within an hour, Rose had returned from Willow Creek with a burlap sack full of carefully selected plants. She worked in the kitchen with focused intensity, brewing teas and preparing poultices, while Sarah watched with skeptical hostility, and Bill paced the parlor like a caged animal. "First, we break the fever cycle," Rose explained, as she carried a steaming cup upstairs. "Then we strengthen his constitution so his body remembers how to fight." Tommy was barely conscious when Rose lifted his head and began spooning tiny amounts of willow bark tea between his cracked lips. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice carrying the same gentle authority she used with injured animals on the farm. "Just a little at a time." For the next 6 hours, Rose never left Tommy's bedside. She alternated between different herbal preparations, applied cooling poultices to his forehead and wrists, and maintained a steady flow of liquid nourishment. Sarah initially hovered nearby, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble, but gradually found herself drawn into helping as Rose explained each treatment. "The red sage is for spiritual strength," Rose said as she prepared another tea. "Grandmama always said that sometimes the soul gets lost when the body suffers too long. This helps call it back home." As evening approached, something remarkable began to happen. Tommy's breathing, which had been shallow and irregular for weeks, started to deepen and steady. His skin, while still warm, no longer burned with the terrible heat that had consumed him. Most importantly, when Rose offered him another spoonful of elderberry tea, He swallowed eagerly instead of turning his head away. "My God," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "His fever's breaking." Bill knelt beside his son's bed, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. For the first time in 3 weeks, Tommy's eyes focused clearly on his father's face. "Papa?" the boy whispered, his voice weak but wonderfully lucid. "I'm thirsty." Chapter 4. The Price of Miracles. By dawn, Tommy Garrett was sitting up in bed asking for breakfast, his fever completely broken, and his appetite returning with surprising strength. The transformation was so dramatic that Dr. Henley, summoned at first light, could only shake his head in amazement as he examined the boy who'd been at death's door just 12 hours earlier. "It's medically impossible," the physician muttered, checking Tommy's pulse and breathing for the 3rd time. "Yesterday, this child was exhibiting clear signs of terminal decline. Today, he shows every indication of robust recovery." "But he is recovering, isn't he?" Sarah asked anxiously, still afraid to trust the miracle she'd witnessed. "Oh yes, Mrs. Garrett. His vital signs are excellent. Temperature normal, appetite restored. I simply cannot explain how such a dramatic improvement occurred so rapidly." Dr. Henley glanced at Rose, who sat quietly in the corner chair where she'd maintained her vigil through the night. "Miss McKinley, I'd be very interested to know exactly what treatments you administered." Rose recited her grandmother's remedies with simple precision, explaining the properties of each herb and the reasoning behind their application. Dr. Henley listened with growing fascination, occasionally asking technical questions that revealed his genuine interest in learning from her unconventional methods. "Remarkable," he murmured when she finished. "Some of these principles align with the latest medical theories from Europe, though arrived at through entirely different reasoning. Young lady, have you considered formal medical training?" "Women can't become doctors," Rose replied matter-of-factly, "and my family needs me on the farm. Perhaps not doctors in the traditional sense, but trained nurses are desperately needed throughout Texas. With your natural abilities and proper education—" Dr. Henley paused, struck by a sudden idea. "Sheriff Garrett, this community has been without adequate medical care for too long. What if Miss McKinley could be persuaded to stay in Dry Creek as a trained healer? I could arrange for her to study with colleagues in Austin, provide proper certification in nursing and herbalism." Bill looked at Rose with new respect, seeing not just the farm girl who'd saved his son, but a young woman of remarkable courage and ability. "Miss McKinley, if you're willing to consider it, this town would be honored to have you. I could arrange lodging, ensure you're properly compensated for your services." Rose felt her heart leap with possibility, then just as quickly sink with reality. "Sheriff, I'm grateful for the offer, but my family depends on my help. My father would never agree to let me leave the farm." "What if we spoke to him?" Sarah suggested, her earlier hostility completely transformed into gratitude and respect. "Explain the opportunities available to you here." Before Rose could respond, raised voices from downstairs announced the arrival of Samuel McKinley, who'd come looking for his daughter after she failed to return to the wagon the previous evening. His face was thunderous as he climbed the stairs, prepared to drag Rose home and deliver the scolding of her lifetime. "Rose Elizabeth McKinley, what in tarnation do you think you're doing? I've been worried sick and your mother's beside herself thinking something terrible happened to you." "Papa," Rose began, but Sheriff Garrett stepped forward to intervene. "Mr. McKinley, your daughter saved my son's life. The doctors had given up hope, but Rose brought Tommy back from the very edge of death using her knowledge of healing plants." Samuel's anger faltered as he took in the scene. Tommy sitting up bright-eyed and clearly healthy, the relieved faces of his parents, and Dr. Henley nodding confirmation of the sheriff's words. She actually helped?" Samuel asked, his voice betraying the wonder he tried to hide. "More than helped," Dr. Henley interjected. "Your daughter possesses remarkable healing abilities that could benefit this entire community. With proper training, she could establish herself as a respected medical practitioner, earn a good living while helping others." Samuel's weathered face showed the internal struggle between pride in his daughter's accomplishment and fear of losing her help with the family farm. "Rose, is this what you want? To leave home and become some kind of medicine woman?" Rose looked around the room at the faces watching her, Tommy's bright eyes full of life restored, his parents' gratitude and hope, Dr. Henley's professional respect, and her father's worried love. For the first time in her life, she was being offered a chance to use her gifts fully, to become something more than just another struggling farm wife. "Papa," she said quietly, Grandmama always said the gift comes with responsibility. If I can help people, if I can save lives like Tommy's, then maybe that's what I'm meant to do. Samuel was silent for a long moment, studying his daughter's face and seeing there a determination he recognized from her grandmother. Finally, he nodded slowly. Your grandmama would be proud, Rose. She always said you had more of the gift than anyone she'd ever known. Then you'll let her stay? Sarah asked hopefully. I'll let her try, Samuel replied. But Rose, if this doesn't work out, if these folks don't treat you right or you get homesick, you come straight home. The family will manage somehow. As the morning sun streamed through Tommy's bedroom window, illuminating the faces of people whose lives had been forever changed by one young woman's courage and compassion, Rose McKinley felt the first stirrings of a destiny larger than she'd ever dared imagine. The poor farm girl who'd arrived in Dry Creek with nothing but determination and her grandmother's wisdom was about to become something the frontier desperately needed, a healer who could bridge the gap between ancient knowledge and modern medicine. But first, she had a little boy to finish healing and a community to win over, one patient at a time. Chapter 5, The Healer of Dry Creek, Final Chapter. 5 years had passed since Rose McKinley first laid her healing hands on Sheriff Garrett's dying son, and the transformation of both the young woman and the town of Dry Creek had become the stuff of local legend. The autumn of 1887 found Rose, now 22, standing in the doorway of her own medical clinic, a modest but well-equipped building that Sheriff Garrett had helped her establish on Main Street, directly across from Henderson's general store. The simple farm girl with stained hands and mended dresses had evolved into a confident young woman whose reputation as a healer extended throughout 3 counties. She wore a practical navy dress with a crisp white apron, her brown hair neatly arranged beneath a small cap that marked her as a certified nurse practitioner, credentials she'd earned through intensive study with Dr. Henley and his colleagues in Austin. Miss Rose, called out Tommy Garrett, now 13 and bursting with the robust health that his miraculous recovery had restored. He bounded up the clinic steps with the boundless energy of a boy who'd been given a second chance at life. Mama sent me to fetch you. Mrs. Henderson's baby is coming and she's asking for you special. Rose smiled at the boy who'd become like a younger brother to her, marveling at how tall and strong he'd grown. Tell your mother I'll be there directly, Tommy. And remember what I taught you about sterile conditions. Make sure she has plenty of clean water boiling. The birthing of Margaret Henderson's 4th child would mark Rose's 50th successful delivery since establishing her practice. Word of her skill had spread beyond conventional medicine to encompass midwifery, herb doctoring, and what some folks called laying on of hands, though Rose herself remained uncomfortable with any suggestion that her abilities were supernatural rather than simply the practical application of knowledge passed down through generations. As she gathered her medical supplies, Rose reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The early days had been challenging, with many townspeople skeptical of a young woman practicing medicine without formal doctor's training. Some had whispered about witchcraft and ungodly practices, particularly when her herbal treatment succeeded where conventional medicine had failed. The turning point had come during the cholera outbreak of 1884, when Rose had worked tirelessly alongside Dr. Henley to treat the afflicted. Her combination of traditional sanitation practices and herbal remedies had helped reduce the town's mortality rate significantly compared to neighboring communities. After that crisis, even her harshest critics had to acknowledge the value of her unconventional methods. Rose, called Dr. Henley from the doorway, his hair now completely grey, but his eyes still bright with the intellectual curiosity that had made him such an excellent mentor. Before you head to the Henderson place, there's someone here to see you. Standing behind the doctor was a well-dressed woman in traveling clothes, her bearing marking her as someone of education and means. She appeared to be in her 30s, with kind eyes and the confident manner of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Miss McKinley, the woman said, extending a gloved hand, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell from the Women's Medical College in New York. I've traveled a considerable distance to meet the young healer whose methods are causing quite a stir in medical circles. Rose felt her breath catch. Dr. Blackwell was the first woman physician in America, a pioneer whose very existence had inspired Rose during her darkest moments of doubt. Dr. Blackwell, this is an incredible honor, but I'm afraid you'll have to excuse me. There's a woman in labor who needs my attention. Actually, Dr. Blackwell smiled, That's exactly why I'm here. I'd like to observe your methods if you're willing. The reports I've received suggest you've developed some innovative approaches to both general medicine and obstetrics. The birth of little James Henderson proved to be one of Rose's more challenging cases, with the baby presenting in a breech position that would have required surgical intervention in most circumstances. However, Rose's gentle manipulation techniques, combined with specific herbal preparations that helped relax the mother's muscles, allowed for a successful, natural delivery. Dr. Blackwell watched the entire process with fascination, occasionally asking questions about Rose's methods and the reasoning behind her choices. When baby James finally arrived, healthy and squalling with indignation, the renowned physician turned to Rose with unmistakable respect. "Remarkable, Doctor," Blackwell said as they cleaned up after the successful delivery. "You've intuitively developed techniques that align with the most advanced European practices, yet arrived at them through entirely different reasoning. Miss McKinley, have you ever considered advancing your education further?" "I'm not sure what you mean, Dr. Blackwell. I've learned everything I can through Dr. Henley's guidance and my own studies." "I mean formal medical school, Miss McKinley. The Women's Medical College would be honored to have someone of your abilities and experience. With proper credentials, you could practice medicine anywhere in the country, perhaps even return here to serve your community as a fully licensed physician." Rose felt the familiar tug between ambition and loyalty that had defined so many decisions in her life. "Dr. Blackwell, I'm deeply honored by the suggestion, but my place is here in Dry Creek. These people trusted me when I had nothing to offer but folk remedies and determination. I can't abandon them now. Who says anything about abandoning them?" Dr. Blackwell smiled knowingly. "What if I told you that we're planning to establish satellite training programs in regional areas, bringing medical education to qualified students rather than requiring them to leave their communities? Dry Creek could become a model for rural medical training, with you as our first field-certified physician." The possibility hung in the air like a promise of dreams Rose had never dared to voice. To become a real doctor, to gain the credentials that would silence her remaining critics, while staying in the community that had become her home, it seemed almost too good to be true. "Think about it," Dr. Blackwell continued. "Your combination of traditional healing knowledge and practical experience represents exactly the kind of innovation medicine needs. Plus, you'd be helping to train other women who want to serve rural communities like this one." That evening, Rose sat on the porch of the boarding house where she'd lived since coming to Dry Creek, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson. Sheriff Garrett approached with the measured stride of a man who'd learned to appreciate life's quieter moments. "Heard you had a famous visitor today," Bill said, settling into the chair beside her. "Dr. Henley says she wants to make you a real doctor." "Something like that," Rose replied thoughtfully. "It's a generous offer, but I'm not sure I need formal credentials to do what I'm already doing." "Maybe it's not about what you need," Bill suggested gently. "Maybe it's about what the next Rose McKinley will need. Some other young woman with healing hands who wants to serve her community, but faces the barriers you've overcome." Rose considered his words, thinking about the letters she'd begun receiving from young women across Texas who'd heard about her work and wanted to learn from her. Perhaps her story was meant to be more than just one person's journey from poverty to purpose. "You know," she said finally, 5 years ago I came to this town as a desperate farm girl, with nothing to offer but my grandmother's wisdom and a willingness to try. This community gave me a chance when no one else would, and look what grew from that faith." "And now you're thinking about planting seeds for the next generation of healers," Bill nodded approvingly. "Sounds like exactly what this frontier needs." As the stars began to appear over Dry Creek, Rose McKinley made her decision. She would accept Dr. Blackwell's offer, not to leave her community, but to ensure that other young women with healing gifts would have opportunities she'd never dreamed possible. The poor farm girl who'd saved a sheriff's son with nothing but herbs and determination was about to become Dr. Rose McKinley, and through her example dozens of other women would find their own paths to healing and service. Tommy Garrett's miracle recovery had been just the beginning. The real miracle was what had grown from that moment of desperate faith, a legacy of healing that would touch countless lives across the American frontier, one patient at a time.